Hey guys, welcome to the show. Today we are going to challenge the mainstream narrative. My guest today is Sean Stone from the Buzzsaw. You can check him out at his YouTube channel. Enter the Buzzsaw. I mean, check it out. This guy's got some fantastic stuff. It will challenge you, and it's going to take a hard look at what mainstream's putting out there and what the alternative is. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me on.
Man, there's so many topics we can discuss out there, man. There's so many things going on in this crazy world. Let's just go ahead and start with your view of elections. Is it a selection process or is it truly an election process?
Of course, it's a selection process that they just dropped the S, right?
How do we know this?
The nature. Well, okay. So let's look at it like this. The nature of the election process is already boiled down by the two-party system. You really don't get the same level of ballot access, the same access to public media, to debates. So how can you run as a non-affiliated independent, for example, or as a libertarian or a Green Party candidate or whatnot? So the party system already is one way of selecting the candidates. And then within the party system itself, which is, again, the blue-red lodge of Masonry, which is now the blue lodge of the Republicans and the Reds of the Democrats, they then select through maybe what might be called the electoral colleges and the superdelegates that get an inordinate amount of votes and influence over the overall process. So even when you get things like Bernie Sanders challenging Hillary in the Democratic Party, it's not really reflected. The actual popular support is not reflected in the actual electoral votes that he ultimately gets. So that's one form of selection. We saw in recent years how there's been allegations of voting machine fraud because there's actual miscounts and numbers that have been affected. We know this historically has happened because Kennedy, for example, had support from mafia elements in Illinois and Texas to beat Nixon in 1960. So that's one form of how the rigging takes place. There's the other form, which is, for example, when Hillary was going up against Obama in 2008. And if you recall, in the whole electoral process, she was actually winning most of the delegates. She actually won the majority of the votes. But the problem was because whoever the powers that be decided, no, actually it's time for Obama to become president, they threw out Ohio and Florida on the notion that, well, you guys voted like 2 days early, I think, a few days early, so we're not going to count your vote at all. So Ohio and Florida, which had voted for Hillary, were thrown out of the process, and Obama then was declared the winner. And Hillary was basically, I'm sure, she was assured, I'm sure, at that point that just, sit quietly, we'll get to you in the next round, which is currently happening now. So the path may have been paved for Hillary. And then in terms of where Trump fits into this whole thing, that, I think, is much more open to speculation. People are excited because he seems to be loudmouth and brash, and he does seem to be challenging the system on things like 9/11, for example. He says he wants to release 28 pages. But meanwhile, we know that he's got a lot of friends and support in the Emirates, in Saudi Arabia, makes a lot of money there selling his name. So will he ultimately challenge the system, or is he just another front man for it? I don't know how to analyze that and gauge it. But on the whole, I do think that whoever becomes the president will basically be just anointed into that position. And unless they're like a Kennedy who has the courage to actually stand up and start to say, well, let's maybe challenge the nature of the currency and how the Federal Reserve creates notes and actually start issuing it from the Treasury again, which is what he did with the $1, $2, and $5 bills, for example. Or let's challenge the military-industrial complex and not necessarily commit to a war in Vietnam with American soldiers. So unless you start doing steps like this, which ultimately cost him his life, I don't see anyone that's going to come into the presidency and actually overthrow or let alone challenge the system that's currently in place, which is just a perpetual war system.
Well, earlier you mentioned the powers that be. Are you saying that when the person who becomes president is in that office, that he is not the leader of the free world, that there's somebody above him that's calling the shots?
Well, first of all, I don't call it the free world. this is a part, exactly. Yeah, that's the whole point, though, right? It's a part of the world. Now that's part of the language. That's called the double speak. I think this is 1984. We have to know how to read into these things. That this is double speak. The whole notion of the free world as opposed to the unfree world. But meanwhile, you're not free. You have the choice of certain corporate controllers, and you might have more choices available to you than other countries. We also have a wealthier history. We have a tremendous wealth that's been built up nationally over time. But when it comes to the freedoms that America could enjoy if we had, I think, a peacetime productive economy as opposed to a perpetual warfare economy that's really predicated mostly in debt slavery. So if you think about it, because America actually has the most debt of any country in the world as far as in an individual basis, I would say we're actually the most enslaved people of all. But it's hardest to recognize that because, again, it's as though it's easiest. How do you say? It's easiest to convince slaves that they're free if you give them access to certain things to enjoy. So as long as they can enjoy their television, their internet, certain basic services, a certain worldview that's really been controlled and fabricated for us by the mainstream media, then it's very easy to condition us to this notion of being the freest people in the world. Now, in the context of the grand scheme of things, yes, we do have a lot of freedom, and I do think that America still is a great country, and not about being the greatest or not great, it's a great country, and we have a tremendous potential, but we have to assert our rights. We have to assert our rights as individuals, we have to assert our rights through other processes like congressional processes at the federal level as well as at the more domestic, local, state level, I should say. So when a president gets elected, yes, it's, I think, largely through the financing sector, the banks that really control countries, because that's what countries are designed to be. They're designed as debt farms, essentially. So people are sold on this whole notion that, the president and the government wants what's best for you, and politicians want what's best for you, and corporations want what's best for you. And it's like, but what is that? Why is that? Why do they want what's best for you? All that they're actually designed to do is to have you work and produce so they can collect taxes on you. So they're tax farmers. So do they really want what's best for me, or do they just want what's most efficient for the system to keep running? And then when you start to pose it that way, all of a sudden people start to realize, oh, wait a minute, maybe it's not about what's best for me at all.
Well, let me ask you, and let me tell my viewers, this is part 2 of a 2-part interview. The first part you can go check out on Sean's channel, Enter the Buzzsaw. Is that correct, Sean?
Well, Enter the Buzzsaw exactly is the YouTube channel, and the show is called Buzzsaw.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So you guys will want to see that first interview, but we've lost a lot of our freedom, Sean, post 9/11. How do we get back the freedoms that we already lost? Because it seems like once power takes freedom, it gains more power for itself. In other words, the centralized government gets more power for itself. How do we get that back?
Right. And this is exactly the question of the hour, and I think it's not being asked enough by people. It's going to be a process. Again, I think of mixing. You have to get independent parties into the congressional seats, into the legislation as a whole. You have to get the independent thinkers, the people who are not affiliated with any D or R establishment party, basically, to get these independent thinkers into positions of legislation, not necessarily into the presidency. I think that's too high a position to sort of even aspire to, even if you're Ron Paul, who was a great thinker, and obviously for me he was the best choice in 2012, but obviously he couldn't even do it, right? So why not get people like him, though, libertarians, anarchists, Green Party, Red Party, I don't care what your party is, as long as you're not D or R, into Congress, where you actually have a position and ability to have dialogue and debate and start to challenge things. We have to ultimately repeal things like the Patriot Act. We have to have more open source access to information. We have to start to deconstruct the national security apparatus that built up since 1947. Now, that could take a long time, frankly. So in the meantime, you have to find, I think, in your own life, the things that you want to do as far as social activism, as far as promoting things that are ultimately pushing us in a path towards peace. Because that's what we really want as people. If you want freedom, you need to have a peaceful society. You have to allow space for creativity, for owning and owning yourself and your ideas and your work, and wanting to ultimately work with others in a creative capacity. That means other countries, but always towards the notion of development of society, of raising the standard of living for people, of wanting a healthier, happier, more prosperous future. And that's, I think, the basis of what freedom derives from, because the more peace you have, the more ability and space you have to create. That's where your freedom is going to derive from. But it doesn't happen when you're in a fear economy, because the fear war economy is all about scarcity. It's about controlling people through debt, through control of ideas, because if you go outside the box, you could be consorting with the enemy, for example. So already there's a notion of an enemy. And I don't think that we as humans really have enemies. I think there might be enemies that are creating systems that control us, that house us, but it's not inevitable that someone from a different country or a different race or a different ethnicity or a different religion is your enemy as a human being. As a human being, our only enemy is the one that tries to imprison us and enslave us.
Well, we're running low on time, so let me just ask you one more question. And this is, I'm going to dip my toe in the pool of political incorrectness with this one, so brace yourself. We got this gender fluidity, transgender, who's going to go to which restroom kind of thing. Where do you land on this?
To me, it's simple. Whatever you have down there, that's where you should go. So whatever, it doesn't matter what you look like.
I said that, my second to the last video I put on my channel, I said that exact thing, and I got a lot of heat for that, man. There's a lot of people out there who are convinced that it's not that cut and dry.
To me, it's cut and dry, because it's like, look, if you got a man's thing, right, and you have a man's organ, and you don't want to go, women don't want you lifting up the seat in the bathroom. That's their biggest fear. The biggest fear is you're going to lift up the seat and leave the lid up and walk out. So if you got a man's organ, you don't want to go in a woman's bathroom, and if you have a female organ, you go in the woman's bathroom. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, that's right. And warning to all
and
you
by the way, men don't mind.
Do not want to go into a men's bathroom.
Men will never complain if a woman wants to come into a men's bathroom. By the way, so for us, it's like it's always unisex.
That's right. Okay, man. Thank you so much for the interview. I appreciate you being with us. Hopefully, we'll be able to do this again sometime. Give us your YouTube channel again before we close.
Yeah, so it's Enter the Buzzsaw. Enter the Buzzsaw is the YouTube channel itself, and people should go there, check out. We have an archive of over 150 interviews that have been done with fascinating people from the esoteric to the conspiratorial and just across the whole spectrum.
Sounds good, Sean. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Brian.
All right, have a good one.
Thank you.
Guys, thank you so much for subscribing to my channel. If you want to support the work I do here, head on over to my store and pick up one of these hard-hitting, conversation-starting shirts that are pretty much guaranteed to provoke thought and spark dialogue as we continue to educate people about what's actually going on in the world today and how these issues directly affect us as individuals. You'll find the link to the store in the description below, and you can use the 5 off promo code to get your discount. Until next time, remember what Thomas Edison said. Opportunity is missed by most people because it's dressed in overalls and looks like work. Let's roll up our sleeves and do the work that it's going to take to change this world. I'll see you guys in the next video.